Hi everyone, it's Mary Kipling from Peters Township Public Library, back again with a heads up about nonfiction books at the library. Since the special military operation commenced in February of Russia against Ukraine, we've had many patrons come to the library looking for books to read to try to understand the war. So I'd like to show you some of the ones that we recommend. We have, for general history about Ukraine, The Gates of Europe by Serhii Plokhy, and also Borderland by Reid. These books teach us that Ukraine has always had a problem with aggressive neighbors from the very beginning, yet it managed to be a great center of Slavic civilization until the 1200s, when there was a particularly devastating invasion by the Mongols. And then the country spent the next 7 centuries being split between warring nations. And then in the 20th century, this is a very important book, Bloodlands by Snyder, who outlines not only Hitler's genocide of the Jews, but also tells us about Joseph Stalin, who definitely tops the total number of people killed. Stalin is responsible for the deaths of 33 million people when he was the head of the Soviet Union, including a very devastating episode for the Ukrainians called the Red Famine. In a period of time between 1931 and 1933, when Stalin was trying to collectivize Russian agriculture, he faced really stiff opposition from the peasants in Ukraine who didn't want to give up their privately owned farms. And since he couldn't succeed with them in any other way, he decided to close all the borders, steal the food, and starve people into submission. Historians estimate that anywhere from 3 million to 4 million Ukrainians were killed. Also in the 20th century, a very significant event in Ukrainian history was the Chernobyl nuclear reactor disaster in 1986. And this is covered in Midnight in Chernobyl by Higginbotham. This was a huge book when it came out. It was on the bestseller list. It was well reviewed. It won awards, and it's a period of Ukrainian history that you'll want to read about. Finally, a more recently released book on the bestseller list, Lessons from the Edge by Yovanovitch. She's the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, and it's a memoir not only of her diplomatic career, which was extensive and notable and difficult for a woman to rise in that level in the State Department, and she did so with success. Now in this book, she also enumerates many of Putin's dirty tricks toward Ukraine, and I'll have to read them to you because the list is too long. He meddled in elections, launched cyber attacks, peddled misinformation, illegally annexed Crimea, invaded the Donbass, and attacked Ukrainian ships in the Black Sea. And that's all before the war began in February of this year. On the Russian side of history, we have The New Tsar, The Rise and Reign of Vladimir Putin by Stephen Lee Myers, and also biographical, The Man Without a Face, The Unlikely Rise of Vladimir Putin by Masha Gessen. Also by Masha Gessen, we have a book that takes place a little bit later in this history timeline, The Future is History, How Totalitarianism Reclaimed Russia. So after the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia did have a brief period of trying to have a democracy under Boris Yeltsin, but once Putin was elected, there was the creeping totalitarianism that happened. A very interesting little book, short read, Putin Country, A Journey into the Real Russia. This was written by Garrels, an NPR correspondent. And she went into the heartland of Russia, a small city there, for over 20 years. She kept returning and interviewing people. She wanted to know, how did the transition from totalitarianism and communism to democracy, how was that going for the average Russian? And so she interviewed people repeatedly during that time period, and this book is the result. We also have Putins People. This is a more recent book, How the KGB Took Back Russia and Then Took on the West by Catherine Belton. And she goes into detail about Putin's KGB background and how his ex-KGB friends and he banded together to reinstate a surveillance state in Russia and how they rose to power and joined in looting their country. From a more economic background standpoint, we have the new map, Energy, Climate, and the Clash of Nations by Daniel Yergin. Yergin covers not only Russia, but China, the countries in the Middle East from the standpoint of energy and climate change. And he shows in this quite extensive section about Russia and Putin, he shows how Putin's actions and his strategies involving geopolitics always come back to the oil and gas question. When the price of oil is high, Putin tends to be more belligerent toward his neighbors, and when the price is low, he tends to stay home. And finally, I have two books by Bill Browder, Red Notice and Freezing Order. Red Notice came out in 2015. Bill Browder was a Wall Street tycoon who saw when the USSR split apart and Russia reemerged, he saw an opportunity to make money over there. So he went over and he was successful, but unfortunately for him, he was also very outspoken about the corruption he found in Russia and got on Vladimir Putin's bad side and eventually had to flee for his life. He successfully got out of the country, but his Russian attorney, Serhii Magnitsky, was not so lucky. He was jailed by Putin and he was tortured there and died in prison. And this is on the bestseller list right now, Freezing Order. Browder remains an activist against Putin's Russia as a mafia state. And he and his investigation team, though Browder couldn't go back into Russia, he had a team that could report from there. And this book covers in detail a money laundering scheme worth hundreds of millions of dollars that has been proven to benefit Vladimir Putin directly and some of his friends. So if you too are looking for background on the current war between Ukraine and Russia, please stop by Peters Township Public Library. We'll have these and other books on display in our first floor lobby.